Hello and welcome to Catamount Community Connection. I'm your weekly host, Brian Collamore. Each and every Sunday for an hour, we speak with community leaders from the business, professional, nonprofit, and yes, political arenas. The goal of the program to make listeners informed about things that are going on, not just in Rutland County, but throughout the state. The legislature now about 2/3 of the way through its process, so there will be some new laws and regulations that come into effect, some of them upon passage of the bill, some of them on July 1st, and we'll let you know more about those as we move along. And so that's the goal of the program. It's brought to you by the Rutland County Agricultural Society, which has brought you the Vermont State Fair at Rutland since 1846. We're looking forward to the 179th Fair, August 12th through the 16th, 2025. So this summer we'll be looking forward to yet another great Vermont State Fair here in Rutland. Our guest today is Representative Chris Keyser, who is one of the new people into the General Assembly. First of all, welcome, Chris. It's great to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Brian.
I have to say, and for those of you that are not aware, if I said this is possibly in the genes, maybe some people would wonder what I meant. And with all due respect, Chris's dad was once the governor of the state of Vermont. And that was back, if I remember, in 1960 and 61, and did not get reelected, I think, in 62. Is that legitimate?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you must have some great stories growing up with a father who was governor of Vermont. Love to have you share any of those that you can, because I'm sure there were some you probably would just as soon keep private. But it must have been an interesting situation. Did you folks live right in the area when he was governor, or were you living somewhere else? So
I was born in Chelsea, Vermont.
Okay,
that's where my father's family is from, and they've been there for since the 1700s. In fact, if you're familiar with the Ed Larkin dancers,
yes,
that is my great grandfather.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's a lot there. I think one of the interesting things that people shouldn't know, they had no reason to, but my grandfather was also a Supreme Court justice.
Wow.
So in the state of Vermont, and geez, you wish things that you wish you remembered. But so we always had Christmas and holidays together. Summer, I remember a lot outside around my grandfather's, and I just remember the tone in which my grandfather and my father would talk to each other. And it was they were both lawyers by training, so it was more of an examination of an issue, and it struck me as a way to proceed, although I didn't get the content. But that was something that many people don't know about me. But I just, in watching how people would my grandparents and my father would talk about different things. So that was one story. The other story was that when my father was inaugurated, now I was only 8 years old, and probably in another time they would have said that he's an active boy, probably HDHD, frankly. But anyway, and I just remember going to the State House where my dad was going to get inaugurated. Thank you. And he was it was my grandfather that swore him in.
No kidding.
Yeah, so that was kind of cool. But what I don't even remember that except for the picture that I have on my desk. But what I do remember is my mother being very specific about how good I had to be. And I think that was the case because she had her hand right on my knee. But
so did he travel back and forth from Chelsea every day?
Yeah, he did. Yeah, and there was some of that was he did his own driving, but he had a driver. And back in those days, they had a state policeman assigned to him. And but Vermont has many different governors' palaces, or so to speak, and they're all where the current governor lives. There is no governor's mansion in the state of Vermont. So he traveled back and forth to Chelsea to Montpelier and whatever. And a lot of times there was a driver that would take him, and if he spent a lot of time on the road, as I remember. Yeah.
So the governor today has a security detail, and they have 2 state police officers assigned to him at all times. Well, I don't think they live in the house with him, but as soon as he leaves, they pick him up and take him wherever he needs to go. So in that regard, it's probably pretty similar. It must have been pretty amazing growing up, having your governor or having your father be governor. And I didn't realize, so you just told me that your grandfather, in other words, your dad's dad, was on the Supreme Court. So did the other kids know? Was it? Were you kind of set apart because of that?
No, I've always enjoyed people's company, but I always felt kind of alone.
Yeah.
And you can't help it. I mean, as a grown senior now, you sort of understand that type of thing. But I always felt as if I was. And for no good reason, anybody would think that somehow I had something that others didn't. Because, frankly, my mother was a great influence on me. She was she came originally from Yonkers, New York. She was not a Vermonter, and she said to me that, and this is what I do remember, but those that are given much, much is expected. And so that's always been sort of a mantra. It's something that Mom has always put in the back of my head.
Yeah.
So I don't think I had a normal upbringing.
It doesn't sound like it. It doesn't sound like it. We're talking to Chris Keyser, whose father was governor of the state of Vermont and who now is in the General Assembly representing Rutland City. And this is his first term. So normally when I have someone on the show that's sitting in their seats for the first time, we talk a lot about what expectations you might have had before you ran, what surprises might have come up that you thought, I never knew that was going on, what committee you're on, that sort of thing. And again, in the House, for those of you that don't pay too much of a detail, in the House, you sit on one committee all day long. In the Senate, we sit on a morning committee and an afternoon committee. And in between times are floor sessions, which means the whole 150, if you're in the House, go to the House and conduct business. And the Senate, we're 30, go to the Senate chamber and do the same thing. So, and there are occasions when we have joint assemblies with, the governor's messages twice a year, the budget and the state of the state. We just had one about a month ago now where we retain judges, and that calls for a general or a joint session. So let's get into that. And we certainly talked a little bit about your dad. I'm sure that'll keep coming back as we continue to talk about, because if I'm remembering my Vermont history correctly, your dad, F. Ray, was the last of a long, long line of Republican governors. Phil Hoff broke that long line, if you will, in 1962 in the election, then was inaugurated in 63. And he was the first Democrat to be governor, I want to say, in 180, 200 years, something like that.
The defeat of Dad was the end of 150 years of Republican governorships. And it was very interesting. It was a symbol, not a symbol, but it was, as things move through in culture, that was the time when you can say that was the time when Vermont turned more to a democratic and ultimately a progressive attitude, all driven by the large populations in Chittenden County. And that's when during that period of time is when the Supreme Court said that the legislature needed to be represented by a consistent number, not just by each town. So the whole rural character of governance in the state of Vermont, the rise of the Democratic Party, a sea change in what Vermont had been experiencing, had been used to.
Yeah, there were a lot of cultural changes that happened, obviously, in that first little part of the 60s. And then later on, in my view, the interstate and the construction therein of both 89 and 91 really did change the character of Vermont. Up until that time, you really had to want to get here in order to get here. The roads weren't particularly great. But that changed. Everything changed when we had the interstates. I'm still of the opinion that has more to do with change than a lot of things people realize or don't realize. When we gain access to cities like Boston and New York, where before it would have taken you literally almost all day to get there, now you can be there in 3.5, 4 hours. So that changed a little bit. And as Chris mentioned, up until I think it was 65 or 66, right, the House was represented by one legislator for every town. So it had many more towns, and Burlington had the same weight, if you will, as Chelsea did, for instance. And the Supreme Court of the United States said, you know what, that's not really an appropriate representation of the populace. And they left it up to Vermont. You figure out how you're going to do it, and if you don't, we will. Mm-hmm. And that's when we had just tremendously passionate debate in the House, because many people were literally voting to put themselves out of office, and a lot of tears shed and a lot of really strong feelings. And so what we wound up with was 150 House members. I don't think the Senate changed in that way. We had 30 when we started, pretty much, and we still have 30. But and the unions began to exert much more influence on the political process, I think, as well. Chris mentioned the population, certainly of Chittenden County, was much greater than any of the other counties in the state. So they became areas for change to a much larger degree. And we've seen it pretty much continue, although we've had a Democratic governor, then a Republican governor, then a Democratic governor, and so it's gone back and forth since your dad was in office. This time we have Governor Scott, who's been in for 5 terms, and I have no idea. He doesn't share counsel with me whether he's going to run again or not. But we've had Madeline Kunin and Howard Dean in the interim, where we've gone back and forth. So, a lot of things have definitely changed. And that rural character of Vermont, which used to be, for many people, so attractive, is now, it's still there, but not to the degree it used to be. So if you're from Chelsea, for instance, you used to have one House member representing that town. I don't know how many towns, or probably 4 or 5 towns now represented by Chelsea. So it's different.
Very much so. I mean, you need to, I think the way the division now is like 4,200, and Chelsea is now around 1,000. So I don't know what that district is, but that's what's happened. Rutland used to have more than that, but now there's 3.5, so to speak, with the way the thing is divided up.
Yeah. So I don't know. I'm a real history buff, and I love imagining what things might have been like in 1955 and what they're like today. And, the world's changed too. It isn't just Vermont changed. Everything has changed. And, you could argue some of it for the better and some of it maybe not so much so. But anyway, so we're talking to Chris Kieser, who is in the Vermont General Assembly, a member of the House of Representatives. And let's talk a little bit, if you will, about some expectations. You have sort of that advantage of having a father be the governor, so you probably understood a little bit more about the political process than certainly I did. If you had asked me 12 years ago how many people are in the General Assembly, I wouldn't have known. I would have had no idea. I knew we had 2 senators, United States senators, and 1 rep, but beyond that, I really wasn't that engaged in politics, I guess. So did you have expectations coming in that either, things lived up to them, or you were surprised by them?
Coming into the House?
Yeah.
Coming into the House, again, it was a similar experience that I've had all my life is, this place, you've been here before, and somehow you have special knowledge. Well, that's never the case.
Yeah.
I come at it as trying to experience it and for the first time. What was very interesting, and this is a very individual type of thing, but is the number of new reps that came in. There was Democrat, but mostly Republican. There was 54 new people that had come in. The other thing I didn't understand until later on, a couple weeks in, that the previous biennium also had a large turnover. So we've had, as far a great loss of institutional knowledge, as they call it, which, maybe you didn't want to remember how you used to do it. But the point is, there's a lot of fresh faces and fresh ideas and that type of thing. And frankly, I expected, and it did happen, that with the election of the new Republican group, that we now have enough to sustain a veto. So what I am experiencing is a more of a negotiated type of thing instead of something that's laid out in front of you that you shall have. So that's different, and so. I expected it. I didn't know how it was going to work. It is a very complicated but simple exercise. And what I mean by that is you've got 149 people. All have got opinions, and they're all up there because they want to be up there, and they ran for election, so they're motivated and activated. And so it's you're running up against a lot of people with a lot of ideas, and now you've got to influence those ideas. It takes a lot of time, and I think I was a bit impatient in the beginning. I know I was impatient in the beginning to try to network and do all the things that you try to do to get to know people and to understand where they're coming from. But this journey is going to be longer than a couple years if you're going to accomplish anything. That's what I did learn, and plus there's a lot of great people. Man alive! I mean, people from Derby and Bennington and in between. It's again, I think common cause, and that's what I've said to a lot of people is that when you're elected under the same conditions of the four different things, which is affordability, education, public safety, and affordability, we all came in with a sort of a sense of this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to tackle. Well, we had no idea how to go about that. And, of course, we had the leadership that knew what they wanted to do. So it's a sort of an interesting dynamic, and we'll see how that plays out. But I've enjoyed the relationships. I have to have calmed myself down and not been I have to work at things and see the openings, and I'm not going to be able to move those very fast as a freshman legislator.
That's a very thoughtful response. I came in, this is my 11th year in the Senate, and so I never had the advantage of having the ability to sustain vetoes. From the time I came in, I'm trying to remember exactly the numbers. I think we had 7 Republicans out of the 30 my first term, and maybe even the second term, and then it went to 8, and then it dropped back to 6, and then this year it went from 7 to 13. So and you need 11 in the Senate to sustain a veto. So we were able to do that. And similarly, the House was probably in the low 50s when I came in, and then it went to the 40s and no ability to sustain a veto. And then this year it's gone up to, I think it's 55 or 56. And on occasion, you'll have an independent person in the House at least join the Republicans in a particular vote, not always, but on some votes. So you could get to 57 or even 58, and all you need there is 51. So it is a little bit different landscape than it was. And I don't know whether it was Senator Mazza or one of the more elder senators said to me, when you folks get to the point where you can sustain, you'll become more relevant, and people will actually have to listen to you and try, as you said, to negotiate and to work things out together, which I think is, the ideal political process is there's give and take on both sides. Neither side gets 100% of what they want, but in the end, you wind up with a much better bill than if you just had a supermajority and could force things through. And I mean that both ways. I don't think we would be any more ahead if the Republicans had a supermajority, because power sort of corrupts you after a while. You just assume that everything you're doing is right, and the other side is wrong. So I think the best one is, if you could have a 50-50 split, that'd be great. Yeah, that's rarely happened, but it is a different thing now than it was. So I guess you have the advantage, Chris, of at least being at the point where it's now a little bit closer in terms of numbers, and who knows what 26 will bring. We don't know. The midterms, we've got obviously some serious turmoil in Washington. That is creating a lot of uncertainty and angst and pushback in some quarters, and I don't know whether that's going to be good or bad for the Republican Party in Vermont.
You wonder. Here's a thought. So if you have a reaction against the current administration in the midterm elections, how does that bode for the Democrat election in the state of Vermont? Yeah. So maybe we'll have a reversal. Who the heck knows?
We don't know yet. No, we don't. So we talked a little bit about expectations, you coming in. I know the State House physically had to be much different, but you were probably too young to remember what rooms looked like what. But I mean, the chambers, the two chambers look similarly. In fact, it's one of the most amazing things to me. I'm sitting in the same seat at the same desk that it's probably 200 years old.
That's right.
And it's just they've recarpeted the floor every now and then, but the walls and the ceiling are the exact same way they've been literally for hundreds of years, and I get to sit there. I won't be there forever. My term will end and I'll be gone, and somebody else will be sitting there at some point. But it's just, and Senator Flory used to say, when you come down off the interstate, and there were times in your dad's time when the interstate wasn't there yet. But for me, when you take exit 8 off the interstate, you come and you make that first turn and you see that golden dome. It's like, wow, yeah. I worked there.
There it is.
So, yeah. Okay. And then some surprises. Maybe I think very few people understand the committee process. It really is, I'm going to say 65 to 70% of what happens there. Leadership has its own way of initiating things too. If the House Speaker or the Senate Pro Tem doesn't want to have something taken up, chances are it won't be taken up and it won't go to a bill. But most of the work is done, in my view, in committee, and then on the floor, things can change. But anyway, we're talking to Chris Kieser, although I'm doing more of the talking than Chris is. And we'll come back here after our first break here on Catamount Community Connection. Welcome back to Catamount Community Connection, your weekly public affairs show here on Catamount Radio. I'm Brian Collamore, your host, and thank you very much for joining us. Our show brought to you by the Rutland County Agricultural Society, which has brought you the Vermont State Fair at Rutland since 1846. We've been talking with Chris Kieser about the old days. That's the old days. That the fair existed before the Civil War. And we're looking forward to the 179th Vermont State Fair here in Rutland, August 12th through the 16th. So we've talked a lot about the sort of the legacy that the Kieser name has. Chris's dad was governor of the state of Vermont back in the early 60s, and how things have changed. Some would say for the better. Some would say maybe not 100% for the better in terms of both the complexion of the General Assembly, where you literally used to have one rep for every town. So if we have 249, 250 towns, that's how big the House was. The well didn't get any bigger. The seats were just smaller and closer together. And from my understanding, there were actually spittoons on the floor, and you could smoke on the floor as well. So, the old days of chewing tobacco and all of that, it blows my mind to think that was possible. But it was. So let's talk a little bit, Chris, about your committee. Did you put your requests in to the Speaker? In the Senate, we put 3 in. We put our 3 choices. And sometimes you get none of them. Sometimes you get 1. Again, in the Senate, we have 2 committees. You only have 1. So did you request where you wound up, or how did that work out?
So that's, as people may not remember, but there was a fight for the speakership this year.
Yes.
So I had a woman call me, a representative call me that was interested in unseating the current, and so there was a bit of uncertainty as I came into that, and I got presented with two different, one from the current speaker and one for the opponent, of what you wanted. And in one it had 4 selections, and one had 5. And my background has always been very strong in finance. You take a look at what my resume says, but on finance committees, and I've been statewide, or been local and statewide, and actually been on a couple national finance boards. But regardless, that's my nature, and numbers talk to me, as I say. So I was looking for ways and means or appropriations, and I was reaching high. I also I wanted the people in power to know that I was energized and I wanted to be involved at the highest level. I think that, and I know that when I did that, I knew I was asking for something impossible. That just doesn't going to happen. But I just wanted to have my say, who is this Keyser kid that wants to do something like that? So what I ended up on, and in hindsight, it's probably the best darn committee I could have got on, is I'm on transportation. Mm-hmm. And transportation is a committee that is got a history and a legacy of agreeing on how to take care of the infrastructure of the state of Vermont. And I mean, we have progressives all the way through very conservative Republicans on that committee. We do have the second Republican chair. There's 2 in the House. The rest are Democrats. When you have it, for example, you have a social committee like health and welfare, or a budget committee. Those are a lot of separate ideas that are trying to come together without a legacy of trying to agree. And so I didn't quite understand why I was on transportation, but it turns out just because of my business background and the fact that I did trucking, I was involved in the railroad, I know all sorts of things about transportation. It was a perfect fit. At least for what I thought I was doing, and the fact that there had to be some collegiality, not that there isn't in other committees, but there really had to be a complete understanding that we were going to vote that thing out 11-0. I mean, you're spending $900 million, and so that was different, and I really have grown to appreciate it. Wanting to be on the big money committees, what that would have done to me is really disrupted my family life, because those committees put in hours and hours, and they stay late, and they work on weekends, and I didn't appreciate that. I did not appreciate the amount of work that the representatives on those committees put in, and I've got to give them a high five for the work they do. It's easy to criticize that, but spending $9 billion, oh my God, can you imagine such a thing? So transportation was good. Out of that, I was able to present part of that bill on the floor. I'm pretty natural in talking with people, so that was fun. And I actually was able to explain that the part of the transportation bill that I was presenting was that was going to prohibit molesting wildlife on rail trails. And it seems kind of odd, but anyway, phrases like that tickle me. So that's my committee. Enjoy it very much, and we've got most of it now. The big bill is out, as they say, and that's a transportation bill, and that's going over to Senate now. And the next thing we do is receive the DMV bill, which I've never experienced. We'll have to find out what that's all about. But I guess that's a lot of wording for the way that the Department of Motor Vehicles operates, and that's coming over from the Senate, and that's traditional. That's the way those bills flow. And then the other thing is because transportation has those responsibilities, there's not too many bills that come and get put on the wall, so to speak. And kudos to our chair and vice chair, Tim Corcoran from Bennington, Democrat, to have everybody's bill at least looked at. And we've had a lot of these, I call them constituent bills that were developed because some constituent came to a representative and wanted it done. So we've looked at the 10 or 15 that are on the wall already, and that pales in comparison to, I think, Energy's got 100 of them or something like that. So we're able to be thoughtful and businesslike, I guess you could say.
We're talking to Representative Chris Keyser from the General Assembly. Chris represents part of Rutland City and also, I think, a piece of Rutland Town.
No, not this one.
No, not?
This is all from Route. If you take West Street, Route 4,
yep.
And take Route 7 north, and that corridor right there, pretty much there's a little spot that's not there, but it's over to Evergreen Avenue out in there, out to Georgetti, but then way to the north to as far as the line goes to the Country Club, and in that spot, Phillips and Lincoln and Library and into that area.
And you folks vote at the
Calvary.
church.
Anybody that votes at Calvary, I would be representing.
Okay. And so Chris sits on the Transportation Committee, and you're right. I probably should have mentioned, I just got so caught up in your legacy here and the fact that your dad was governor at one time, not to talk about what you did for a living these many years. You and I have known each other for a long time because I worked here at the radio station in sales, and you had a company that advertised on those radio stations. And I know that's not the only thing you did, but so tell us a little bit about, well, we know where you grew up. You grew up in Chelsea. Mm-hmm. Where did you graduate from high school, and how did you get involved in business?
So I'll even make this political. So back in the day when the Republicans ran the state, there was alliances among different factions of the Republican Party. And there was an alliance between the Republicans that were in Orange County in Chelsea area and in Proctor, the Proctors. So what ended up happening is that my father was asked to come over and be general counsel for the Marble Company. So he moved us to Proctor in 1966, in that area, early 60s, mid 60s, and so that's where I went to high school there in Proctor and graduated from Proctor High School before going on to college. So I went to Tufts University, but really my interest not in higher education, but my first profession was recreational management. I have a certificate from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst on turf maintenance. So when I left, my last job in that profession was I was assistant superintendent and ski area manager at Quechee Lakes. So, and it really is more of an expression of my feeling of being outside, being taking care of the plants and the fauna and all that type of thing. I still love to mow my lawn, odd that I am. But anyway, so that was my first profession. Later, there's a story there, but my father and I got together, and a fellow that was a neighbor of my dad's had Proctor Coal Company. It was an oil and coal company, and I was in the midst of looking outside the state to expand my career and go on, so to speak. And just at that time, that company came up for sale, and Dad said, "Why don't we go into business together?" Well, I'm the oldest, and I'm a type A. He's a type A. We had a little discussion, and it was the best thing for our relationship ever. And I was able to be exposed to some very sophisticated financial analysis, and we really enjoyed each other's company more than just the oldest son and the father type of thing. So, and from that, the rest is history. We made 9 acquisitions over the course of the 40 years I was there. Some business, some expansion of the different product offerings, and I retired in 2000. I sold my interest out in 2011, and then managed it for the company until 2019. But I basically spent 40 years in the energy business in and around this area.
So it's still called Keyser Energy, I think, although HOP took it over, sort of. Just like I consolidated 9 different companies into one, Keyser Energy. Right. When the time came, there was also a larger consolidator that there was several of them that we talked to, but this one was out of White Plains, New York, and they did the same thing. They're all up and down East Coast. So Heating Oil Partners, HOP, bought the company, and I went with them basically because they kept all the people that I hired. We were integral in introducing the propane business to them, and they never had any propane, so we had a leg up on a lot of it. And I had some fun in corporate. I didn't like it, but I knew I grew not to like it. Let's put it that way. But that's just because I'm me and I want to do my own thing. But it was a good exposure and gave me some background in corporate America. And I know from our experience together that even when you stepped aside from the business world, you remain very active in nonprofit type organizations. So give the listeners a little bit of an idea about where you are with all of that world. Okay.
Well, so I made a conscious decision not to be in politics, and neither here nor there. But I made a conscious decision, but that same thing about what my mother told me was very top of mind. So in the beginning, I got involved in the local in the statewide heating oil, and it developed into a more than that. And I became president of Vermont Oil Heat. And that's sort of in your industry. You want to promote what you're doing, and that was that. But in the county, I started off. The transportation was always very important. That was before we had the bypass, and I worked with people on the Chamber of Commerce Transportation Committee. I became chair of that, and then moved up to the chair of the chamber. Later, I got interested in economic development, so I went into RITIC at the time, which was the Rutland Economic Development Corporation, and worked up through the finance. I'm still on the finance committee, and I became president of that. Along with other things, the Killington Music Festival, I was able to add some business acumen there, and we kept it going for a little longer. So any time that people asked me to do something that I thought that I could be helpful for in the area, I tried to do it. I ended up with Rutland Mental Health back in the early 2010s, that type of thing, and there was quite a controversy that went on there, and we were able to make a management change and I'm still on the finance committee of Rutland Mental Health after retiring as chair of the board. So things naturally come to me like that. As my father once told me when I said I should go get a master's degree when we made a larger acquisition, he says, well, you don't need that. You end up running everything anyway.
That's a good one. We're talking with Chris Keyser, who's in the House of Representatives representing Rutland City. And Chris is on the Transportation Committee in the House. And I think we'll take our second break right now. And when we come back, Chris has promised us some more stories about his dad, former governor of Vermont, F. Ray Keyser. So we'll take our second break and be back here on Catamount Community Connection in just a minute. Welcome back to Catamount Community Connection, our show brought to you each week here on Catamount Radio by the Rutland County Agricultural Society, which has brought you the Vermont State Fair since before the Civil War, 1846. and the 179th Vermont State Fair coming up August 12th through the 16th. And we thank the members of the Agricultural Society Board for sponsoring our show. We're talking with Chris Keyser today. Chris, a member of the House of Representatives representing the city of Rutland, and sits on the House Transportation Committee. I suppose I should ask you at some point if you entertain any notions about moving to the Senate, but maybe we'll get that if there's time. But you promised me a couple more stories about your then father, who was governor of Vermont in 1960, 61, and 62. I know there had to have been characters in the General Assembly back then. Again, we're talking, folks, about a time when there were 250 members of the House of Representatives, and then there were 30 senators. So had to be a lot of characters, because the more people you have, the more likely you are. But tell us a couple of kind of memory type things that you can
sure. So as we were talking, the House of Representatives was, I think, 248 or something like that. It's within that range.
There were a couple Gores that probably didn't get represented.
I imagine. And Dad was Speaker of the House also in the late 50s. And now imagine driving around without any interstates around the state looking for support. Hardly a phone would work, right? I think we had a party line in the house at that time in the 50s. So Dad spent a lot of time driving and visiting different people, and a lot of them were farmers. These are all people that were. So when he ran for Speaker of the House, his story he used to tell was that he had gotten his coalition together and trying to develop. It wasn't a shoo-in, and he got word that one particular farmer up in the Northeast Kingdom was working very hard to get him elected, and he couldn't. What was it that made him so enamored? So interested. So he went and said to the fellow, why are you supporting me? Not that I don't mind it. He says, well, let me tell you, you came to the barn, I was milking, and of course I won't engender all the accents that were held at that time, but and as you know, cows will right there in front of you, and Dad always mostly had a suit on. He was a professional. He was a lawyer at the time, and he took his black wing shoe and pushed the manure back into the pit. And Dad never, and I know exactly what Dad just did it because he grew up on a farm. Sure. And it come to find out that was the thing that turned that man towards my father to support him, because he pushed some cow shit back in the.
Wow. Yeah. That is quite a story, Chris. That is quite a story. Yeah. I don't think I'll even edit those words out. I think I'll let them go. People understand. Well, if you're a farmer, you certainly understand that word for sure. Yeah. The other thing, I think he was involved with billboards, right?
Oh, okay. So Route 7 north, above Brandon.
Yeah.
There was a place.
Seashell City.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And they had these big wooden billboards up that this was before any time. This was in the early 60s, and one sign after another, and my father hated those signs. He really wasn't. He always was an outdoorsman. He hunted in all sorts of ways, but really wanted to preserve the nature as he saw it, and he thought that those were abominations against the sights and sounds of Vermont. So during his administration, that was when the billboard ban was put together, and I guess you could say with Seashell City became no more. They had to take down their signs, but that's why the state of Vermont doesn't have any more billboards. It's because of one Seashell City and up just below Leicester, Four Corners.
I can remember those signs, and I didn't get here till 68. So it must have taken a little bit longer to get it through the process. That's the other thing, I think, for me, and I have talked to other House members and Senate members, you don't realize before you're up there how long a process it is to get something done. You know, you have to have a bill drafted by legislative counsel, our lawyers. Then you have to have it introduced. Then you have to have it referred to a committee. They take testimony. That could take all of one session which is 1 year. And then it gets pushed to the floor and passed in one side, and then it goes over to the other side. So in many ways, government works very slowly. Sometimes that's a good thing because it becomes more thoughtful the more people that take a look at an issue. But it's also very frustrating for a lot of people that think, why can't we just change that? Why can't we do that by next week? Mm-hmm. Well, it's never going to happen by next week. It just isn't. So I remember myself thinking, boy, this isn't how I thought it worked. I thought things happen a lot more quickly than they do. But that's a pretty good story because I do remember, and you have to be careful when you say it, Seashell City, mm-hmm. And each sign, and it was like, 2 miles ahead, and then it was 1.5 miles, and then it was 1 mile, and here you've arrived. And I always thought there'd be this amazingly big thing, and it really wasn't all that large.
It was awful. It was just a tourist trap.
Yeah,
it was, and they were very garish signs. I think I remember pink and that type of thing.
Interesting. So we're recording this on March 31st, Chris Kieser and I. By the time this airs, it will be the following Sunday, whatever the date that is. I think it's probably the 7th maybe, or maybe the 6th, something like that. So we can't necessarily bring you up to date on things like the Budget Adjustment Act, because by the time you hear this program, something will have happened one way or another. We can't predict that in the coming week that we're looking at. So it really doesn't make any sense to talk about sort of specific budget considerations. You mentioned the big bill, the so-called big bill. That's the budget for fiscal year 26. And that has now, I think, at least if it hasn't cleared the House, it's been on the floor probably for second reading. And it takes 3 readings of a bill to get it passed. So by the time the Senate gets it, again, another week will have elapsed. So that is something that there'll be continuing controversy, I'm sure, about. You mentioned that the governor's recommended budget, it's 9-something. I don't know if it's 9.1 or $9.2 billion. Mm-hmm. That will be toyed with in both chambers. I don't know where it wound up on the House side. I'm guessing it was more than what the governor proposed. It normally is. And then, again, the Senate will take a look at it and make adjustments to it as well. So that is normally the final bill of a session. And traditionally, the transportation bill, which again, $900 million is spent there. And then the capital bill, which has to do with state buildings. And then finally, the big bill. And so the big bill is the one that everybody waits for, because normally when that's passed, we adjourn and we go home. This year, further complicating the system is the whole educational reform piece. And we have not even begun to get firm picture of what that's going to be in terms of governance. In other words, how many school districts and supervisory unions will there be in 5 years? I don't know the answer. The governor's proposed 5 districts, knowing probably full well that was not going to be the end result. The House has not moved in any direction. In fact, much to my disappointment, has actually formed a subcommittee to study it again. So it doesn't look like there's anything moving there. The Senate does have a bill, at least in Senate Education, which I think calls for 12, 13, 14 districts, somewhere in that neighborhood, which probably would be okay with the administration, but more and more work needs to be done. So first you have to figure out how many districts and supervisory unions. Then you got to figure out how we're going to pay for it. And if it's a continuation of using property taxes, and Vermont is the only state in the country, by the way, that funds the education system with property taxes. We're unique. The other states don't do it the same way. It might not necessarily be any less painful another way. You could go to income, and some states do that. But anyway, we have to figure out how to fund it. And right now, it costs, depending on where you live, somewhere between, let's say, $8,000 per student per year in the K through 12 public school system. And that's on the low side. And it goes all the way up to about $27,000 per student in other, certainly more affluent communities. So what the governor has decided on is sort of maybe not halfway through, but close to it, $13,200. That's what's called the formula, or the foundation formula for presenting bills to pay for our system. So if a community wants to go above that, if they feel they want a new pool or a new floor or a new whatever, it would be up to the people in that community to pay the difference. That hasn't been decided yet either. Then you get into class sizes, how many kids should be in a class. I mean, right now we literally have students that number single numbers in classes. When I went to school, and now I sound really old, we had 25 or 30 kids. And we only had one teacher, as I remember. It happened to be a nun, in my case. But even in the public school system, there was one teacher and about 20, 25 kids. So I don't know where that sweet spot is for the number of kids in a classroom, but we have yet to decide that as well. So that is going to keep us there from what I hear. And again, recording this on March 31st, I don't think that the legislature will adjourn before June 1st this year. And in many cases, it'll be back, whether there's a veto session, and there is one already planned for June, or whether committees will continue to work on this education piece and then have everybody come back. I don't know. But we have 2 more months to work, I think, before that's done. Speaking of the budget, I know in your dad's time, when he was governor, there was a year when, again, Republicans were in charge back then, and a certain faction of the party wanted a certain number attached to the budget. Your dad didn't agree, and I think they went. The General Assembly went pretty long that year.
That's right, and it's so that whole thing about absolute power. But it was Asa Bloomer, West Rutland, who was the dean of the Senate, a very powerful man, as I understood it. And in fact, his legacy is up there with John Bloomer. His grandson is the
Secretary of the Senate.
That's right.
Yep.
So good friends. But during that period of time, and I couldn't begin to tell you the details, and probably unimportant, but they went to July arguing about what was going to be in the budget, Asa and my father. And I guess nobody's happy, but that shows good compromise, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, I've been there. I don't think we've ever gone into June, but we've gone to late May a couple of times. Again, 11 years I've been there, so it's a fraction of time for some people. I mean, we've had people, Bill Doyle, who was from Washington County, was there for 52 years or something. Unfortunately, his last couple terms, not sure he would even agree, were super productive. He was failing physically, and he's passed away since then. But I don't want to be there for 52. Well, I can't be there for 52 years because I wasn't elected until I was in my 60s. So there's no way that's going to happen. But we're budgeted, by the way, for 18 weeks. That's what the legislative budget calls for. We get paid on a biweekly basis for 18 weeks, and then we're supposed to be done and get out of Dodge and go home and do something else, because this is a citizen legislature. It's not a full-time legislature, and people have other things and other jobs and other commitments. So I like thinking that we could get out maybe this year by June, early June. But who knows? I don't know. New Hampshire does it a little differently, from what I understand. They pay, I think, $100 for the whole session, and that's all they get. So they come in, they get their work done, and they scram. They don't stand around waiting. Now, the committees in New Hampshire meet year-round, but the actual legislature doesn't meet the way we do, for the 18 weeks. So there's different ways to do it. And then there's full-time legislatures. Massachusetts, I think, is. New York certainly is. California certainly is. So I don't know where all of this ends up, but that's an interesting story about within a party, factions and fractions were deep enough to hold people there till July before the budget. I wonder who wound up winning.
Well, that I'd have to go back and look at the book.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So we've got maybe 3-4 minutes left of the show. Again, we're talking to Chris Keyser, who is a freshly elected House of Representatives member from the city of Rutland. Born and grew up for at least a little bit of his life in Chelsea. His dad was governor of Vermont, and also his grandfather was on the Supreme Court in Vermont. And so there's a political legacy, even though you told me you were staunchly resisting any effort to get you involved in politics. And I can remember calling you back around 6 or 7 years ago, asking whether you'd ever be, no, I don't, that's nothing I'm interested in.
That's right.
But at some point you did find the interest, and obviously were successful. And I don't know whether it's too early to start thinking about the next term, or whether this is it and you've experienced it. And that happens too. Former mayor of the city, Chris Loris, I think he served maybe 2 terms, maybe it was just 1. Found out it wasn't his cup of tea. Mm-hmm. And stepped back and never ran again. But anyway, I think you've done tremendously good work so far. If you do choose to run again, I'd love to see that. We'll see what happens, I guess, in the next 12, 13, 14 months. But,
That's right.
Anything else you'd like folks to know about you?
Well, one more story about Dad. I think everybody likes those stories. Yeah. So, as I said, he used to drive back and forth from Chelsea to Montpelier, and that's on Route 110. And he was one evening he was following a car, and this was back. Now he was governor, so it's 61, 62, something like that, 1960, and they were throwing finished beer bottles out the window behind, and now, mind you, he's driving a car with license plate number 1 on it. Yeah. And these guys, so he turns on the siren and the lights and pulls them over. Individual. And so here comes the governor up to the side, and he said, "Okay, guys, I see what you're doing. You go back and pick up every single one of these and bring it over to the sheriff's department in Chelsea, because that's where the Shire town had the court and the sheriff's office. And when I'm going to check, and if you don't, I'll have you arrested." Well, when he got there the following afternoon or something like that, there was more than a 6-pack there. They were shaking in their boots. But that was the type of thing that Dad, he respected the environment in which you were at, and that, really is a conservative. I think of all the Act 250s and all the clean air and the clean water was all done under conservative Republicans, and I think we should remember that.
Yeah, well, when I came to Vermont, Dean Davis was governor, and I can remember him being the first one for Green Up Day.
That's right.
And he would hop in a helicopter, and he would go from community to community, and people were out there picking up trash, putting it in bags and stuff. So that was my first memory of Green Up Day, but I can remember Dean Davis, and he was governor. Of course, I went to school with Jim Douglas, and he was the same class as I was in school, and said that he was going to be governor someday, and I just blew him off. I said, "There's no way you will." And, of course, he became governor, so you never know.
You never know.
Well, Chris, it's been a pleasure. I want to thank you for joining us today, and hopefully we'll have you back on the show at some point, and good luck the rest of the session.
Thank you very much, Brian.
And we will see or hear all of you next week here on Catamount Community Connection.